It's incredibly rare for a car to be considered cool for everyone. So often, price is actually the main factor dividing car enthusiasts, and it goes both ways. Too cheap can mean undesirable for the wealthier in our hobby. But sometimes a car comes along that just transcends all of this, like a Casio F91W worn by us mere peasants shopping at Walmart, as well as the rich and famous. The Mini was one of those rare cars that you couldn't help but love regardless of your status. But today we're looking at not only the story of the Mini, but also how a specific version of the car took on the very best sports cars in the world in a true underdog story. If you guys want to learn more about the Mini, I definitely recommend this book by Giles Chapman. It is really well written and researched, and it was a great source when working on this video. Though the term people's car wasn't used in marketing for the Model T, it was surely the first successful attempt at bringing motoring to the masses, and it paved the way for cars like the Mini and also the Volkswagen Beetle and really all cars going forward. Ford's methods for mass production of the car, and that leading to an incredibly affordable price and just an understanding of what would be necessary on a vehicle for Americans everywhere to be able to drive, these are the things that really stand out with the Model T. This formula would be taken to another level going forward. Citroën would add things like electric start. The Austin 7 was a sort of Model T for Great Britain. The Fiat 500 would take the premium car form to the economy car market. And of course, there would be the ultimate people's car, literally named the people's car, the Volkswagen. Where the Volkswagen stood out in these pursuits of bringing motoring to the masses was in its unique form, thanks in part to the brilliant mind of Ferdinand Porsche. With its overall shape and rear engine, it was like a different thing altogether than any car that had come before it. But every one of its quirks really existed for a reason. Few automotive designers through history have been able to look at this thing we call the car from a different perspective to really create something unique. Now, as the 1950s got underway, the name of the game was economy for manufacturers wishing to make these sorts of everyman's cars. With tiny micro cars like the Bond mini car and the Isetta taking this pursuit to its full extent. But early on, these small vehicles never quite gained the mass appeal of, say, the Model T or the Volkswagen, despite their ability to go 100 miles on a gallon of gas. At this time, the Morris Minor and Austin A30 were Great Britain's best examples of the everyman's car. In a rather hilarious post-war memo from 1945, a delegation of higher-ups in the British automotive industry had a chance to visit the ruins of Volkswagen's factory and actually take the vehicles as their own, but their report said this: "This car does not fulfill the technical requirements which must be expected from a motor car." I don't know why I'm giving it a transatlantic accent. They said its performance and qualities have no attraction to the average buyer. It is too ugly and too noisy. Such a type of car can, if at all, only be popular for 2 or 3 years at the most. Okay, so they were wrong. The Volkswagen would go on to outsell the Morris Minor 19-1. Then things got really dire in 1956 when the Suez Canal crisis disrupted oil supplies in Western Europe. Rations went into effect, and the British motor car industry was forced to get serious about fuel economy, as those small microcars suddenly threatened to take down the entire British automotive industry. At this point, the companies that made up the British automotive industry had kind of all reluctantly joined forces to create the third largest automotive corporation in the world, known as BMC, full of rival companies at this point, which, did cause its own problems. Anyways, BMC chief Leonard Lord charged Austin's Alec Isagoni to make a new small car. Lord wanted a car that would be more compact than the Morris Minor, but it needed to be able to comfortably seat 4 adults. Oh, and it needed to be extremely economical, of course. More of a car, though, than any of these stupid bubble cars that were so hated by the higher-ups in the British automotive industry, but priced relatively close to them. Oh, and we can't afford to make a new engine, so you gotta go find one that's already in existence among the BMC companies. Oh, and he only had 2 years to go from initial ideas and sketches to full-blown production car that BMC really hoped would kind of be a new people's car for Great Britain. Engine selection would be no problem for Isagoni though. He'd been an Austin man for years and he knew just the platform, the A-Series engine. He also knew that front-wheel drive was probably the way to go, similar to the Morris Minor. If he was going to innovate with his design, especially in terms of space savings to make room for 4 adults comfortably, he would have to get creative. There was no budget to use exotic, thin, lightweight materials, so brilliantly he decided to have the A-Series mounted transversely. Now this may sound obvious today, but nobody had done this with the A-Series engine. In fact, not many manufacturers had done this really at all. Now this would call for a rethinking of how the transmission would fit with the engine, so Isagoni decided to mount the gearbox horizontally, also transversely, within the oil sump. But with 80% of the car's mass dedicated to passenger space, it even had 10-inch wheels, which was unheard of even for this time. And that was again for space savings. And saving space was everything for Isagoni, having limited the overall length of the car to 10 feet. He designed sliding windows so that the doors would be thinner and have more elbow room. A single gauge on the instrument panel was all the info you needed. And it wasn't mounted on a typical dashboard, but separate to make room for more storage. The weld seams were on the outside, and the door hinges as well were on the outside. All of this was for space savings on the inside. Under Isagoni, his team, which was made up of brilliant minds like John Shepard and Jack Daniels, not that Jack Daniels. Anyways, they worked tirelessly to bring this vision of a revolutionary new car to fruition. Isagoni was truly rethinking the practicality of a small car. It had innovative rubber cone suspension to give it really great handling, along with the rear placement of the battery, and then of course that front engine. The torsional strength of this monocoque frame gave the Mini amazing handling. Early testing actually proved the car to be too performance-oriented. 37 horsepower coming from a little A-Series engine was powering this car to over 90 miles an hour. It was actually too much for the suspension, and especially for these tiny little drum brakes. The thing only weighed 1,300 pounds, even less than its contemporary Bug-Eye Sprite. Early on, it was clear that this thing had some performance chops, but that really wasn't the mission at all. But this isn't surprising given Alec Isagoni's history building and racing small cars. It's like he couldn't help make a little race car, even when the goal was to build an economy vehicle. They actually decided to go for a smaller capacity version of the A-Series engine to counter how fast the thing was, bringing the horsepower down to 34. But as we'll see, the Mini would come into its performance own. It's like it couldn't be held back. In just 7 months, which was way ahead of schedule, a mock-up of the car was completed, and perhaps most importantly, this was the cutest damn car to ever come out of Britain, and it was just much more forward-looking in terms of design than the dated Morris Minor. This car was boxy, and boxy was soon to be in style for cars. In August of 1959, the production car was ready to be revealed to the world, badged as a Morris and Austin car. The use of Mini for the Austin Mini Minor really was what stuck with the public though. Journalists and buyers alike went absolutely nuts for this new car, because it was just so different from what had been coming out of BMC in the years prior. Orders flooded in for the affordable little Mini, and soon over 100 Minis were being built every single week. It didn't take long for this car to become a sort of British cultural icon, which really did help it sell well. The Beatles drove Minis because they were cool, hippies drove Minis because they were great for hotboxing, moms drove Minis because they were fantastic for getting groceries. But something else was happening. Sports car enthusiasts were starting to get their hands on Minis, and what they found was shocking. This thing was like a little race car. You could absolutely thrash it through the twisties. It held a line like the very best sports cars in the world. It was so light and so nimble, despite Alec Isagoni consistently denying that it was designed with the track in mind. People started finding that it was pretty good on the track. Isagoni always said that its handling was for road-going safety, not performance or racing, but of course racing was in his blood, and the Mini showed this. In 1959, a Mini would win its class at Snetterton, not thanks to its acceleration, which was not great at this point, but rather because of the way it could corner. Front-wheel drive, and of course the Mini's specific weight distribution with the transmission and the engine sort of sitting over the front wheels, meant that you could drift around corners in a rather entertaining way. But this put loads of pressure on the front wheels, so BMC redesigned the wheels. They said this was for safety, but everyone knew it was about racing. In 1961, John Whitmore would take wins both in the 1-liter class and the outright race at the British Saloon Car Championship. Then racers started rallying the Mini, taking on the bigger, more powerful sports cars available at the time, and they slowly started to gain on these cars in results. So at this time, John Cooper's rear-engine Formula 3 and then Formula 1 race cars were really paving the way for the future of racing, and Cooper told Isagoni that he thought that they should make a larger displacement, more performance-oriented Mini, a sort of hot version of it. Now, making a limited edition production hot Mini would allow BMC to have the car take part in racing at the highest level as a production car. BMC agreed that this was a good idea, so Cooper went to work turning the already quick little Mini into a full-blown race car. First, they upped the cc's to 997, giving it a longer stroke. Then they raised compression from 8.3 to 1 to 9 to 1. Twin SUs were added, larger valves. All of this wound the power up to 55 brake horsepower, and this forced them to reinforce the crankcase, closer ratio gears, and perhaps most importantly, the smallest production disc brakes ever up front. As you guys probably know, lap times are not just about power and acceleration, or how fast you can go, it's just as much about how fast you can stop. In this form, the Mini's 0 to 60 was chopped down from 30 seconds to 18 seconds, and this car would come to be known as the Mini Cooper, rightly named after John Cooper's involvement in the project. In 1961, the Mini Cooper was released to the public. Everyone wanted one, but it was limited to 1,000 units. Still, those models that got in the hands of racers instantly started winning, especially in rallies, and not just winning its class, but often taking on the significantly bigger, more powerful race cars from the likes of Jaguar. John Cooper knew that he could get even more out of this platform with racers and tuners messing with the Mini Cooper. Some were even eking out 100-mile-per-hour top speeds from the little car. One of those being Daniel Richmond, who was immediately hired to make the next iteration of the Mini Cooper, which is the Mini Cooper S. Now, upping the cc's would bring the Mini up to the 1100cc class, and that's what they did. This meant widening the bore, stronger pistons and stronger valves, and beefed up crank bearings. In this form, the Mini was now pumping out 70 horsepower. More than double the original Mini, but it was staying light. 0 to 60 was now 13 seconds, and the top speed was 95 miles per hour. And it wouldn't take long for the S version to become a sort of range of sports cars with different engine displacements, putting the car in different classes of racing. Now it was just up to BMC's racing team to see what the car could do. You know, win on Sunday, sell on Monday is best applied for manufacturers selling more affordable sports cars. I mean, who cares if Ferrari wins? I still can't afford one. But what if the car that wins one of the most prestigious races in the world is the same car your neighbor drives to work or to get groceries? Well, in January of 1964, the Mini would go down in history as it took on the giants of the sports car world at the iconic Monte Carlo rally, going against cars 3 times its size, from Fords to Mercedes to Jaguars to Porsches. This was a prestigious and really treacherous event, and manufacturers invested heavily into making their cars suited to the difficult 2,000-mile race from Minsk, Russia to Monaco. The Mini Cooper S didn't just win its class in '64, they took the manufacturer's title, and Paddy Hopkirk and Henry Lydon would win the race outright, beating everybody. And news spread of the Mini's kind of David and Goliath victory, and its status as a true sports car was really cemented. '65 was the same story, and in '67, Minis would dominate the rally. In the straights, the bigger, more powerful cars had the edge, but the Mini couldn't be touched in the corners. Maybe winning, the Formula 1 title is more impressive, but for sports car buyers, I would rather have a car that could win this race. And I think that's how a lot of people felt. And the way Hopkirk drove his Mini was just the stuff of enthusiast dreams, with his patented drifting technique. For production, the 1275 version of this hopped-up A-Series engine was probably the best. One of the questions I've always had about Minis, though, was what actually made them so good as sports cars. I think the best comparison from the time that really shows the Mini's uniqueness is with the Sprites and Midgets, also BMC sports cars that I personally have a lot more experience with. These cars also have that go-kart handling and a lot of similar features to the Mini. And they also would take on much larger, faster cars in their day in racing, but I think their traditional rear-wheel setup, along with the A-Series engine being mounted longitudinally instead of transversely, kind of gave them a disadvantage compared to the Mini. And this is why the Mini was seen rightly as a better platform for racing than the Midget and Sprite. I know some of you might race Midgets and Sprites, so I know that these cars can all be competitive, especially today in vintage racing, but there is a reason that BMC invested more heavily into the Mini. Weight savings is a huge part of it. You know, the Bug-Eye Sprite would come out around this time, and that would later become the Midget, and those cars are very similar to the Mini. When they were first released to the public, both cars were right around 1,400 pounds, but as the Midget carried on and got more powerful, bigger versions of the A-Series engine were put in it like the Mini, but it gained a little bit more weight than the Mini. By the time the Midget and Sprite got the 1275 version of the A-Series engine, it weighed over 1,500 pounds. And originally, they were going to put the hopped-up S version that went in the Mini into the Midget, but it actually would have been too fast, competing with MG's flagship sports car, the MGB. So the Midget and Sprite never got this high compression head the way that the Mini Cooper S did. And of course, the Mini stayed lighter. I mean, in '64, that 75 horsepower 1275 Mini Cooper S still only weighed about 1,400 pounds, coupled with disc brakes and that unique engine setup and front-wheel drive. It was just perfect for racing. My point is, it is in part weight and weight distribution, but it's also just the uniqueness of the Mini. It was just a different car. Throughout automotive history, various manufacturers have shown the world what sports cars are really all about. In the case of the Mini, it was all about proving that aerodynamics and horsepower aren't necessarily everything. Again, this was a car made to just haul a lot of people for its size, but proper weight distribution and just less weight in general can go a long ways towards making a great sports car. But again, this really wasn't the original intent for the Mini. It's sad to me that those wishing to have a sports car think that they have to go buy a Supra and that's the entry point. I mean, it's just crazy. Obviously, there's the Miata, but why aren't there people out there taking cars that aren't used for racing and just making them into sports cars? Why couldn't a Honda Fit or a Toyota Prius be a good sports car? Okay, I don't know if a Prius could be a good sports car. You get my point. But I do think this is why so many enthusiasts are turning to older cars or to 90s cars, because they're fun, they're lightweight, they're reliable platforms for customization. Sure, they can't hang with brand new sports cars, but that's not really the point. It's a much purer way of approaching the hobby. There's less pretension about how much you spend or how much horsepower you're making. People want that kind of experience that really was available in the 60s from cars like the Mini. You could go buy a Mini or a Sprite or a Midget or a Spitfire without having to sell your kidney, and you would be all set. You'd have a great sports car. Unlike today, where according to the Stradman, you have to spend $50,000 just to go to a car meet. Now, if that's the case, I think you're going to the wrong car meets. Owning a production sports car shouldn't be about how much you spent or how flashy your car is. It's supposed to be about driving the thing, about having fun and getting better at driving and pushing your car to its limits. And the real ones know this has always been a better experience in cars like the Mini. You can't really push a modern Porsche or an Italian sports car to its limit, even remotely, on public roads. So what's the point? The Mini really showed us that sometimes the best sports cars are kind of hiding in plain sight. This understated, tiny-wheeled grocery getter that was meant to just be kind of the people's car proved to be one of the best sports cars that money could buy. I would love to hear from you guys. Have you had any experience or owned Minis, especially classic Minis, but not even classic Minis? Let us know in the comments below. We'll see you guys in the next one. Drive safe.